Three.
All right, good morning, everyone. This is David D'Arcangelo, lead meteorologist at Susquehanna International, doing today's discussion for Tuesday, the 4th of May. So the period that we are discussing is the period that verified for the 28th of April to the 2nd of May. I think we're going to do a little look ahead into what's to come for today's forecast, which is the third week in May. And then we may even do a small discussion on what is perhaps the more exciting thing in the commodity space, and that is not natural gas or electricity. It's in fact the ag markets this spring, particularly, well, really all of them, but I'll spend a little bit of time more talking maybe about corn. So to start with today, I wanted to show a graph of kind of where we've been. And what I'm showing is this is U.S. natural gas demand in, I think that's about, it's reddish. I'm colorblind, so bear with me. And then normal in blue. This goes back to the beginning of February. And obviously you can see normal demand starts to fall through the later part of winter and spring as temperatures across the U.S. warm up. And what I really wanted to show was not the extreme cold and the high natural gas demand that occurred in mid-February with the associated central U.S. and Texas Arctic shot. And just for reference to the y-axis is demand in billion of cubic feet. The higher you go, it's the colder it was, and the lower we are in this scale, it's warmer. In a couple of weeks, maybe 3 to 4 weeks, this will switch. And when it's hotter than average, demand will be above the average line. And when it's cool, demand will fall below the average line. But something I think we've pointed out in the last 3 or 4 discussions, and it still continues to catch my eye, is this kind of oscillatory phenomenon between an overall warm window. The base state has largely been warm since the end of February. And you can see that by most of the daily demand falling below the average line. But it's curious that every, say, 6 to 10 days, we get these cold shots. First week in February was a little cold shot. We saw another one right after beginning of March, another round around mid-March, another one around the first few days of April. One that just kind of fouled up our most recent verification, kind of late second, early third week in April. And here we have tailed off at the end to warmer than average. So it's been a warmer than normal pattern for the last 8 weeks or so, maybe 9 weeks. But it's curious that we get these downdrafts of cold, which spikes demand. And we've seen some really quite poor verification the last number of weeks. And what we're challenged by is picking out in the 16 to 20 day, those periods which are very warm, which this most recent verification was, versus the little pockets. And some of them only last for 2 or 3 days, but they're enough to kind of mess up your verification if they fall squarely within that 16 to 20 day. So this is a fairly oscillatory pattern, and it's largely likely as a result of kind of tropical forcings, but not exclusively. We also had a fairly large typhoon second week in April, which probably messed up some of this late April verification in the Western Pacific. But it's a challenging period. And I think one thing that we continue to learn through this process is how difficult kind of nailing down a 16 to 20 day window is. So some things we like to talk about here at my company is we talk about kind of the base state. What is the mean? And the mean has clearly been warm. The country's been about 2 to 2.5 degrees warmer than average since late February. And that's fairly evident by most days being below this normal line. But every once in a while, and not actually every once in a while, but every week and a half or so, we're getting these cold shots. And we're entering another one starting really tomorrow in the Midwest and peaking late this week and this weekend, Midwest, Great Lakes, and Northeast. So we'll have another cold shot, which will send demand a little higher. Now, each one of these becomes more muted as we go into spring, but nevertheless, it's enough to really kind of follow up our verification. So I want to share with you what we did verify, though. This was a warm period, 28th of April to the 2nd of May. You can see that most of the country, almost all of the country, except the Southwest, the interior Southwest, was warm. There was a cutoff low over northern Mexico with some precipitation centered around West Texas, but most of the country was well above average with pockets that were very warm in the mid-Atlantic states. We were in the mid to high 80s through most of the mid-Atlantic last Wednesday. At the beginning of this period, we also were very warm over the weekend across the central western Midwest, but really largely most of the country was warm. There's something interesting that occurred here though, and well, let me talk about the verification first. So this is the verification for this period. The European was coming in with 40 HDDs, the CFS was 49. I have to say myself, I was 43 and a half. I took the middle ground. My gut feeling was that we'd probably be leaning towards a colder window though. And I think Dave even mentioned something around his 46, which was with regards to some of the timings of a rather strong MJO wave and potentially leaning towards the colder side. That really would have been the right idea for both David and myself had we moved this verification window forward 5 days, but alas, we did not verify so well. Dr. Decker did very well, or did much better than the crowd with a 38.6, but there you can see the verification came in at a relatively meager 24. So, you know, most of us though were in that 40-ish range. Consensus was 41.4, you know, so no real spectacular verification here. You know, all of us were kind of centered right around that Euro number, or even a touch colder. And it was that fear that the MJO wave that was progressing across the far eastern Pacific and emerging into the Indian Ocean was going to disrupt us to the point of yielding a colder period. Here's actually, you know what I'll do is let me do this. This is roughly the window. It verified, this is Tuesday to Monday, but really covers easily the Wednesday to Sunday period of verification. So this was the upper level map. You can see that cutoff low over northern Mexico, but broadly a ridge that was really centered from offshore Pacific Northwest through most of the middle of the country, and then for the East Coast, particularly the Southeast. A main feature that shows up on this 500 millibar map, though, was this very stout negative NAO, right? A very strong ridge over Greenland, which we imagined, and I imagined, I think, to promote more trophiness across the Great Lakes and Northeast. Instead, a ridge wedged in there, and the trophiness was centered more across central Canada with another lobe over the Canadian Maritimes, but clearly not a good verification period, even with the promotion of a fairly vigorous negative NAO signature, something that we've really seen emerge since late March and has been kind of a semi-dominant feature for the last 5 or 6 weeks. That was really predicted well by the MJO analog. So let me share with you what we imagined the MJO to be. So I thought we would see, actually, let me do this. This was the MJO forecast that was made on the day of this prediction. These were the MJO forecasts on the 13th of April. We were coming out of phase 6 and we were squarely in phase 7 from a Wheeler-Hendon perspective. This is the verification, which was a very vigorous MJO signature going across phase 8 and has now progressed into 1 for the last few days in the later part of our verification period. The European did quite well with that though, right? Well, not quite the large amplitude that we saw. Those were the European ensemble members. We predicted a phase 8 MJO progressing potentially into phase 1 in that 16 to 20 day window. I consider that a very good MJO forecast from the European. The GFS was a bit more confused. It really didn't understand what to do with the forcing, and you would argue, well, is going kind of maybe some retrogression through phase 6 and parked in phase 7, and maybe really not a very clear signature with what that GFS was going to do. But the Europeans seem to have quite a good beat on this, and so we come up with some MJO analogs here. And one of the reasons why we were leaning on the colder side was this is the verification, or this is the correlation of MJO phase 8 in April. We should really probably look at maybe a combo of April and May because we kind of straddled those 2 months. But 2 things really stand out. When you look at MJO phase 8s in the month of April, what they typically yield is 2 things. One is a very large ridge over Greenland. That gets a check plus because it was a really strong verification. Consequently, you see a very strong trough over Scandinavia. And let me go back to the verification, and that verified as well. The very strong trough sitting over like kind of Northeast Russia, Scandinavia, and Western Europe was really well verified. What did not occur was the downstream troughing along the East Coast, or at least in the eastern third of the United States, that tend to yield what we thought could have been a colder or marginally leaning colder forecast. So the ridge poked itself in there, and therefore, we just, we had a big kind of a swing and a miss for the most part. Dr. Decker was, I think, the strongest performer of the week, but none of us really were approaching the magnitude. And that's one thing that has shown up time and again, is that even if we're kind of quote unquote on the right side of the forecast, we're missing the magnitude. But again, going back to the graph I showed at the beginning, we have these kind of oscillations, which even in a warm leaning pattern, we're getting these pockets of cold. And I think that makes it very challenging to kind of take big stands in that kind of a pattern, right? We're not really seeing one anomaly dominate for weeks and weeks, even though in general it's been warm. The cold pockets have tended to interfere with that. And that causes a little bit of a headache when we're making forward-looking forecasts, because I think there's a recognition of, even though it's been warm leaning, if we're just coming out of a cold period, maybe we are struggling to kind of catch the upcoming pattern because we're influenced by what we've just witnessed or what we've just come through. Today could be another example of that as well. So the MGO was, I think, a hit, but the resulting pattern was not. So the correlation for the MGO really broke down. The question would be why. I don't want to spend an inordinate amount of time on this today because, well, for one, I don't know. I don't really have a great understanding of why we've kind of flailed around and missed this verification period. To me, we just missed this really warm 5 or 6 day window. In general, it's been colder than average. And if we look at the period starting, say, today or tomorrow through this coming Saturday or Sunday, we're going to verify cold again. I haven't looked ahead as to what that might mean for next week's verification, but I've got to think that if I recall back to what I was forecasting on the 20th of April, it's not going to be very good, at least from my standpoint, because I'm kind of maybe getting the overall pattern correct, but missing the 5 day window there, the 16 to 20 day quite badly. So that hasn't been great. Again, to maybe do a bit of a hindcast, I don't really have a great idea why the ridge wedged in over most of the US, even with a deep trough sitting in central Canada. It's just one of those, spring is a very tough time of year. The transition periods are very challenging. The tropical forcings in general, in a broad sense worked out okay, or pretty well, even from a negative NAO standpoint, but we're just not getting the pattern correct for this window here. So what does that mean going forward? Let me just share this. I want to share. Yeah, this is actually what I wanted to share. So where are we now? The 1 to 5 day has another large trough coming into the central part of the U.S., particularly Great Lakes and Midwest. And you can see that here by these top 3 graphs. These are the GFS, European and Canadian 1 to 5 days. We're going into a rather cold 5 day window here with the ridge kind of over northern Canada, as you can see, and a bit of a ridge off, not a bit of a ridge, but a ridge in the west. The resultant downstream trough has continued to be quite strong. What were we forecasting when this period was in the 11 to 15 day? And you can see all 3 global models did quite poorly, or going to perform quite poorly, right? The GFS had a ridge in the east. The European had a very strong ridge in the east, as did the Canadian. None of them saw the potential for a big trough. Maybe you could argue a trough across the interior west or the Rockies from all 3 models, but really kind of completely whiffing on the long wave pattern. So this is causing a lot of challenges, right? We're not even forecasting for the 11 to 15 day. We're one period farther removed from that. And I think these things are just becoming really challenging. I'm really, for one, looking forward to kind of disposing of this kind of really choppy, kind of gnarly spring pattern, even though the weather has been, I mean, Dave and I were commenting even before the tape started today, it's been a rather pleasant spring really in the East Coast. But in reality, these 5 day periods are just really chaotic, and the models themselves aren't getting it. So our quote unquote hope of really getting the 16 to 20 day right is honestly pretty low right now. So I, for one, I'm looking forward to maybe moving the calendar forward a month or 6 weeks and try to get some sense of maybe what an early summer pattern is. This is certainly not it, right? The correlations between now and summer are absolutely zero. So we're not thinking that this somehow is a foreshadowing of summer, but this is really the kind of the detritus of maybe a leftover late winter pattern, retracting jet, shorter wavelengths, and some cutoff lows in the subtropics that just are not helping us really get a beat on the weather, so to speak. So I know we really are struggling to come up with the proper theme for depicting this right now, and drawing any parallels between this and summer feels pretty fruitless at this time. Even though we have things to look at, I feel like sometimes we're stretching to kind of find signals when really all it is to me is mostly noise. I'm gonna take a pause there as I kind of get thought about here for the next step of this forecast. But does anybody have any questions over what we've kind of covered so far?
I have a couple of thoughts before I jump in. Michael or Philip, do you guys have any questions or comments?
Nothing on my end for the moment. If I think of something, I'll let you know.
Yeah, same.
Okay. Yeah, Dave, that was great. I just also wanted to give kudos to one of our sponsors there. I think Maxar also had a pretty good forecast there. I think they had a 33. So I can't leave them out. They're under industry.
Oh, okay. Oh, I missed them.
yeah.
Yeah, good call.
Yeah.
That's very good verification.
So kudos to Maxar. But I was going to say too, like I really think, I love the point you just brought up, because we've touched on this for the last while at times, but like the idea of it's one of the challenges of being a medium range forecaster is timing can also get you. And again, I'm going to sound a little bit like I'm playing Monday morning quarterback here and sore loser, because my HDD forecast was obviously terrible explicitly, but and obviously I wasn't on the desk and I wasn't doing these things, but I think if I or it's Dave was doing this, like if you were couching that forecast as, hey guys, listen, I don't know, the timing could be off by plus or minus 5 days, right? Because when you get to the 16 to 20, 21 to 25, there's going to be a certain amount of error there, and I can't control that. But if you had said something like, with that said, I have, relatively good confidence, whatever that is, that we're not going to go into a sustained warm period, that there's going to be a cold push during that period. So, if the market, if you guys are sensitive to like significant long-term heat, I don't think that's happening. I think, I really feel because of X factors, whether it was MJ or whatever, that there's going to be more of that cold variability, even maybe more cool than warm. But again, I don't know the exact timing. There could be initial, I could be wrong on the timing. I could miss that. But even if I miss that, I feel really good that it's not going to be like a 10 or 15 day period. It's going to be like, oh, I missed 5 days, but then boom, the cool came in. So I was just thinking about that if that's how someone conveyed it, if a meteorologist conveyed it to the trader, then I think there's still significant value to that forecast, because the trader knows, assuming he had confidence in that and was waiting that we weren't going to go into an early hot summer period, but just a short-term blip, which is apparently what it's turning out to be based on the fact that looking at the short-term forecast here.
Yeah, Dave, that's a great point as to kind of how you communicate it. And one thing we've tried to point out here in recent weeks is the choppiness of how this late winter and spring has verified. And also just to point out, the skill is very low. So anyone that's looking at an 11 to 15 day forecast, just with the understanding that we've not just verified poorly, we verified nearly opposite of kind of what the models have been showing. While it's perfectly acceptable to suggest that that's true what's happened, it may not be very true on what's going to happen, but at least making note of that, the fact that we've had very poor skill this spring in that time window is valuable. The one other thing you mentioned too that I wanted to point out was that just sometimes missing that 5 day window is acceptable if you're kind of getting the broader pattern, so to speak. But that sometimes is dependent on time of year. And I think I did this discussion a month ago, and I said then, and I'll say it again today, is spring gives us a really wide strike zone in terms of kind of missing these forecasts. This was an egregious miss in terms on my part. I know yours as well, Dave. We're playing a little Monday morning quarterback, and sometimes it's just licking our wounds. But today, we get a little bit of a pretty wide latitude into how bad the miss is and really non-impactful. And one other thing to point out is this is a really challenging time of year with regards to the debate over whether it's heat or cold that matters more. I'm of the mind that it's heat, but there's still, we're, for the northern half of the country, we're still in HDD territory for the next few weeks. So, there's a good argument to be made that cold still matters. I think heat matters because I think that there's a narrative that gets created with early heat that has this kind of maybe bias or lean towards early heat for summer, which is a bullish indicator for natural gas and electricity markets. But nevertheless, it's a really hot debate that starts in April, early April, and it goes all the way to like middle May over like what's more important, the emphasis of heat or cold. And we're still in that time window today. So, just the acknowledgement that, even within the energy markets, I don't really think that there's obviously the strongest of agreement on something as simple as that.
That's a great point. And I just want to say, to your point about that the spring gives you a lot of leeway, just to make a little more concrete for the guys on the line, like, imagine this was mid-July, right? And I don't know exactly what those anomalies would have translated to, and let's maybe exaggerate a little bit. But if that, if this 5-day period if you had been saying like, hey, I think it's going to be a cool period, blah, 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 and you get this 5-day, the 5-day period of anomalies, and I don't know, the mid-Atlantic, New York City, Philly, places like that are in the mid upper 90s for 3 or 4 days.
Oh, it's a dagger, right? Yeah, that's a huge whiff, from missing that kind of a week in summer. This would be really a very stout CDD verification, probably something in the top 5% or something.
Yeah.
But yeah, so we get a grace here. We'll get some makeup calls coming up, but so time of year is so hugely dependent as well. And I just continue to be just amazed at how challenging a 16 to 20 day window is.
Yeah.
And I've been doing this for a very long time. So kind of, does that cover what you wanted to talk about, Dave?
Yes, thank you.
Sure. So I want to go into the period upcoming. This is our first forecast that we're going to do for CDDs going now to the verification window from May 19th to 23rd. And again, it's going to be challenging because we recognize that, we've come out of this, right? Deep trough the next 5 days. Models are forecasting a ridge. And then the question of who the heck knows what's going to look like 16 to 20 days from now. But here's the look of the CDDs, the first week of the first CDD forecast of the year. I think this is there's a fairly good argument to be made to lean to the warmer side with above normal CDDs. For one, the setup looks like we're going to have an MGO that is kind of collapsing or fading, and maybe the MGO is less useful as a signal. This is the MGO forecast as of today. We're really strong in phase one. I actually read something yesterday where this, and I didn't verify this independently, but by the looks of it, it seems right, is that we're one of the strongest spring MJO amplitudes to go across phase 8-1 on record. And it seems no surprise then that, we're going to have very cold next 5 days. But the MJO signal tends to fade, and there really isn't much of a signal when you get out into the end of the 11 to 15 day. And certainly no signal, at least apparent signal for the 16 to 20 days. So the question would be, what base state might we return to? And I'm of the mind that we return to a kind of a milder leaning base state, but there's one potential kind of challenge with this. And most people have gone to the milder side. In fact, I didn't see this, but Dave's has a 26 number of CDDs. Michael has 24 and a half. I think these are they have strong potential with them. The European is kind of a small lean to the warmer side, 17.2. Although if you look at the averages are long-term averages around 19 or 20. So I shouldn't say it's a really warmer lean. I'm kind of siding with the European 17 and a half, and maybe going a little bit cooler than the long-term average. Here's one challenge that we're going to have the third week in May is that precipitation is going to become and play a very large role. So let's look at, this is the European model forecast for that week. This is the map that's forecast. You could tend to see, if you kind of connect the warmth over the Great Lakes and Northeast with the warmth over the Gulf of Mexico, you could imagine a pattern that a lot of population centers are in above normal temperatures for the European model, with any cold kind of confined to the interior West. But there's one thing that's kind of bothering me, and we'll see how this plays out. And one thing that bothers me is that the potential for precipitation that week. And this is the forecast for precipitation from the European model. And there's a very wide swath from the interior Northeast, Great Lakes, through the Midwest and into Texas of above normal precipitation. And its change from the previous forecast was actually fairly remarkable as well. So this was the change from its previous forecast for that week. And you can see all positive anomaly changes with much heavier potential precipitation across the Mississippi Valley, kind of the western part of that southeast region across Texas, incorporating some large demand centers. So one headwind potentially on getting really robust CDDs for this third week in May could be precipitation. And I'm glad this is being recorded so that we can come back and laugh at me here in 3 weeks and say, well, that didn't verify at all. And in fact, it was a really warm forecast. So I see the warm potential. I think that the cold threat, as the MGO kind of fades and stops becoming a signal, and we get to back to be more of a kind of a quasi La Nina-ish base state, that to me says warm. So our leans today on our forecast, the way we communicated on our desk today, are for increasingly warm forecast past mid-May. Once we kind of get rid of the cold, but that cold actually looks like it's going to linger into a good part of next week as well. But once we kind of rid ourselves of that cold, probably between say the 11th and or really the 12th and the 15th of the month, we see the ability for a large ridge to emerge. But the question of, is it a ridge on the East Coast or is it a ridge in really the eastern third to half of the country, makes a big difference. Because if it's a ridge that's confined more to the East Coast, it may allow for on the western periphery of that. And if you can imagine that there's can be either cutoff lows or interior west troughs, which kind of spit out a lot of precipitation risks. That's a headwind as we go into summer in general, and I think it could be a headwind for this upcoming period. So my gut tells me, and this is an unscientific gut, but the gut says that I like the forecasts that are 20 or better. I'm holding back for the threat of precipitation. So that's kind of where I'm coming down with it. Anyone have anything else on that? Anyone want to comment? I'd be happy to take some of the thoughts from, I don't know if Michael's on the line, but I know Dave, you're with us. The idea behind a pretty warm forecast for that week.
Michael, do you want to talk about your view first?
Yeah. So obviously I'm on the warmer side of the spectrum here. And I kind of, going through my forecast thought process, it's not as in depth as Dave D'Arcangelo's, but so I looked at the teleconnections and I didn't really see a very strong signal from the teleconnections. And I kind of based it on more so the CPC and what the CPC was saying, and they have a very warm forecast, especially in the East Coast and along the South. And I think especially for early CDD seasons, I think the South is kind of the biggest player, at least early on.
Absolutely. I want to point out too, Michael, I want to interrupt you real quick. If you drew a line that week that we're looking at, the 19th to the 23rd, if you drew a line from roughly Philadelphia to Kansas City, that's the break point for normal where you are in CD territory. Anything south of that, you're definitely in CDDs, and obviously increasing the further south you go. So, really Atlanta, Dallas, Houston, are your most robust CDDs a week that we're looking at. So sorry, I just want to share that.
Yeah, and I think those places were Dallas not so much. Dallas was above average, but it wasn't like super above average, like it was like, yeah, it's probably just be above average, but that to me that doesn't inspire a lot of confidence in it being much warmer than normal. But Atlanta was, I think, had a 60% chance of being above average, so I kind of factored that in a little bit more, especially along the East Coast. If you get a couple of 80-degree days in there, that can, especially when the values are this low, that can kind of make or break a forecast sometimes. The other thing, I think it's interesting about the precipitation, because I think that's something that can often be overlooked. At least I overlook it when dealing with uh, look, is that map right? Is it,
Yeah, it feels, Michael, do you think that it should be opposite that?
yeah, it probably should. I thought I put
Like
above
one West
average
Coast,
demand.
one
Oh,
Texas.
Yeah, no, guys, that's my fault. Sorry to interrupt, but I meant to mention, I was going to say quick housekeeping note. I think we switched to CDDs. I think everything on the board is correct. I did have a few bugs earlier this morning, but I think everything is correct that you see in terms of the digital numbers. But I realized when I submitted my forecast, I have to switch this. So you're absolutely right. If you did like above normal demand, like in the winter, of course, that would be like cold, right? In the summer, that's would be red or warm. And I forgot to switch it, so that's my fault. And hopefully, I'll have it. I'll try to have that done for next week.
okay. But yeah, so like I was saying, I usually don't look too much into precip, and I think that could end up being being a bigger factor than some of the other things that I saw in my forecast, simply because in the early seasons, I know that obviously if there's precip during the day, it keeps the daytime temperature lower and the nighttime temperature a little bit higher. But when in the early summer, late spring, I don't know when it's going to be, but probably I'll say late spring. In the late spring season, the nighttime lows I don't think are warm enough, even with cloud cover, to produce very many CDDs, if any, especially um, I'd say north of Philly. So that could end up hurting my forecast. Something I just to think about for next time.
Anyone else? Thanks, Michael. Appreciate it.
I can talk about my rationale a little bit. It's let's see, Dave, do you have the MGO page up from the forecast contest? Or if you don't, I can show you. If you go to if you go there,
Yep.
go to
Tools.
or is it research? Maybe it's research. Yeah, there it is. That one. Yeah, try that one.
Okay.
All right, and then it should be okay. You can try that. See if you can get through it. Your computer's gonna blow up.
I know. Thanks for.
Well, if it doesn't work, that's fine too. But
All right.
if
Okay.
you want me to share my screen real quick?
Yeah, go ahead.
All right, I'll just share mine so that I don't give you
That's all right.
a virus. All right, let me see here. All right. Share this stuff. Yeah, share. Okay.
Oh, should I have to stop sharing? Oh, no, you're good.
No, you're good. You're good. All right. So I put some weight on I guess two things. It wasn't a lot of rocket science here, but the thing that caught my attention was, like Dave had already mentioned, we're in this really strong signal circuit, right? So when I see a circuit like that, catch your attention. It's this is not a trivial kind of event. And I looked at our sort of analog MJO tool here around early mid-May, and looking at a lag of 16 to 20, and it's basically in the sweet spot of like just about as hot as this thing gets, right? So I mean, it looks strong there, so I felt like, okay, based on that alone, I'm probably gonna I'm going to put something on this. The fact that we have such a strong event that happens to correspond with one of the strongest signals. And then on top of that, I thought just from just a little bit of subjective, just sort of pattern evolution, I guess we go to the EC. But I wanted to give kudos to I just happened to catch this. I don't look at the forecasts like Dave does, like as frequently, but like multiple times a day and things like that. I just look at it maybe once a day or something like that. But something on Twitter caught my eye. It was a little while back that Judah Cohen had said something about, hey, watch out for this negative NAO. It could produce, late season snow and cold or whatever. And I remember looking at the temperature map at the time, and it was pretty benign. But certainly that has changed. So kudos to him on catching that. But anyway, so Dave talked about, we've got that NAO cold, the trough, and a couple cold surges coming in. There's the 6 to 10. There's 11:15. NAO kind of breaks down 11:15. Neither model shows kind of like a real resurgence. Like here's the CFS 11:15, and there's back to the EC. So my thought is, okay, here, we get the NAO. It makes sense that we're going to get the strong cold surge, but I don't see the pattern rebuilding. And then, we've got, again, from the tropical Pacific here, a really good signal for warmth. And then throw on top of that, just the fact that, we're going into mid and late May. And, in the back of my mind, obviously there's statistics for this too, but, the 10-year trend, maybe something stronger than a 10-year trend, usually wins the day overall in the summer. So I kind of, again, there's a little bit of subjectivity there, but I think I put those three factors together to say I'm gonna hedge on the warm side for this period. So that's all I have. I'll stop sharing, give it back to you, Dave.
All right, cool. All right, so good stuff. So I think that, even though it's the first CDD forecast of the year, we've got some things to talk about, and there's going to be a little sporty with regards to this verification, and so I think that'll be a lot of fun. One thing I think that I just want to share, David mentioned to me, we talk about how boring spring weather can be, and when we get into this discussion, it's actually not as boring as we imagine. So do I have to share screen again, Dave?
Oh yeah, if you can share your screen.
Okay. So we talk about how boring these things might be, but in general, there's still a lot of things to talk about. And Dave asked, like, what's the the MO out there right now? Like, what's hot on the street? And energy weather in North America, and particularly the United States, is just not very exciting, and fortunately not a lot of scrutiny, because forecasts haven't been very, very good lately. So we got that going for us. But the one thing that has been a lot of fun lately and a bit challenging is, and I guess I'm going to try to bring up a price. Price of corn is really skyrocketed. It's got a lot of headlines, and let's see which one. This will probably be fine. This is corn over the last, really the last year, but it's really been the last couple of months. It's been super exciting. We've seen corn, which basically spent most of 2020 kind of sub $4, sub 350. This is dollars per bushel. And then in the last 8 months or so, we've seen this acceleration of corn prices to the point where we had a big leg up to roughly the 550 level late winter, and that's where it stayed until early April. And things have just kind of really accelerated from that. This is not an entirely a weather story, though. I want to point that out. There's a lot of things going on in the ag markets with regards to supply and demand, which are not exclusively weather related. But now we're seeing corn prices that are flirting with well over $7 and a doubling of corn. So this would be, if it happened in energy, that'd be great, and we'd have a lot more excitement in terms of regarding how small changes in weather would influence this. But quite a few thoughts on corn here. Corn's an interesting crop. It's not just grown in the United States. There's really robust markets for corn, which coming out of North American winter is centered on Argentina and Brazil. I don't have a great, I want to share the reference maps. So I don't really have, I don't have a way to show South American precipitation easily in this plot. Dave, I don't know if you could bring that up. Could you bring up like the last 60 days? Or is that just too difficult?
Yeah, just give me a second. I'll send you the link.
Okay.
I think it's...
I want to put, I guess you could see this in kind of the 90-day moving average, or here's the 30-day average, 200 millibar heights right there. You can kind of see southern Brazil, not great resolution here. Southern Brazil and Argentina have been under the influence of a really robust high pressure system, to the point where, am I supposed to click on something, Dave?
Yeah. I promise it's not a virus this time.
Where is it?
Oh, it's there should be a chat somewhere. It should say something chat. I just sent you it.
There we go.
And if you click on there, I've used this site. You can see the top left there. It gives you anomaly periods and stuff like that.
Oh, perfect.
Yeah.
Let's do anomaly. There we go. That's pretty good, I guess. 180 would be better. So this is 6 months of precipitation across South America, and it's pretty clear that from northern Argentina, and then really Brazil has been very dry the last 6 months, which is really the heart of corn growing season. They're going into harvest in the southern hemisphere, and frequent daily headlines about how bad the harvest is across Brazil continue to dominate. So while we're planting the crop in the United States, and there's some concern around, are we planting in dry conditions? Are we getting enough moisture? What does planting progress look like? There continues to be a focus. And I know that when I came in yesterday, the maps were deep red in terms of anomaly, not just from above normal temperatures, but from lack of precipitation. Excuse me, across Brazil. And Brazil's a really big contributor to the global corn markets. And so the acceleration of corn prices in the last 30 days is almost exclusively, I think, Brazil, and the kind of the poor quality and the lack of robustness to the South American corn crop. So that's been a big daily focus for us. So while North American weather, particularly temperature, has not been that exciting, there's still an awful lot to look at. I wanted to point out, I'll do that here. We look at the drought monitor in the U.S. This gets a lot of attention paid to it. The drought monitor is not really showing much in the way of drought anywhere in the corn producing areas. Picture Iowa as the biggest corn producing state in the country, and then you draw a circle around it, which extends from the eastern Dakotas, Nebraska, Kansas, eastward to Ohio. So those states really in that circle, including Missouri, Minnesota, Wisconsin, Michigan, that's, your biggest corn producing crop. There's dryness in the Corn Belt, but it's not severe. And we've seen quite a bit of dryness actually start to emerge across central and kind of northeast, eastern Iowa in the last few weeks. But it's to nothing of the extent that what we've seen in Brazil. There's been some attention paid to U.S. progress, and are we planting in drought or less than ideal soil conditions? And I know that's still up in my mind for considerable debate, but the Brazil headlines have really dominated. And so what we're trying to do is, on a daily basis, update our clients on South American weather, if that's changed at all. Is there any hints of precipitation across Brazil? Because small changes like that could matter. But really, now we're in early May, and we've kind of written off the Brazil corn crop. It's been a story for a month, and it'll kind of go away because, we know it's bad. We know that harvest was really weak, and then the attention will now become a North American focus. And some of the focus is, does this Western drought expand into corn producing areas over the course of the summer, or even the spring for that matter? And obviously a lot of speculation around that. So for us, April and May tend to be more ag focused months. They've been that way recently here. I actually could have done a complete briefing on just ag, but it wouldn't tie into the contest. So I guess can't spend over too much time on it. Does anyone have any questions on that? That's just a really brief overview of kind of what we're looking at. Some of our clients are paying attention to those markets.
I don't have a question about the ag stuff per se, but I've had a kind of a different question. So I see there's a lot of red in California and the usual areas that seem to be in a drought every other year over there.
Mm-hmm.
Do you guys do like forecasts for like the fire dangers over there as well, or?
So no, we don't. The short answer is no. That ends up being more of a like a real-time concern. In the past, we had fires that would impact power transmission lines in the West, but that really has to be kind of on a real-time basis.
Okay.
Just difficult to anticipate that,
Yeah.
like where that might show up. We've kind of highlighted, so we have interest that look at reinsurance and insurance risks. And we've been highlighting for the better part of, the 2021 that, there's elevated risk in the West for wildfires this summer, in particular California and the Southwest. So maybe there's I guess a small hint that it could impact the insurance industry out there, but from a power perspective, no. The bigger threat that we would tend to look at on a more daily basis, or at least a forward-looking basis in a forecast space, is the availability of water resources. So hydroelectric power is a huge component of the Western United States as a part of their energy supply mix. So the impact this has to hydro is much larger than how we would address, like, say, fire danger on a forward-looking basis. So what we'll tend to do is we'll look at, and I don't do this, but part of someone on our team does. They spend a lot of time looking at the availability of water, not just the present moment, but what would, like, say, we look like in 30 days, 60 days, or 90 days, given how much snow we saw, how much that could melt into the basin versus how much kind of like inherent moisture might be just available, so to speak. And of course, we don't know precipitation patterns for summer yet, but the water resource perspective for hydroelectric is significant.
Okay. Thank you.
Dave, I had two ag questions for you. And I'm definitely not an ag expert, so, and if you don't know the answer, that's fine too. But let's see, two questions. One is, so you mentioned that not all that was a big price spike, and I'm just curious, like, how much of it do you think is attributed to weather? Like, again, from a layman, it just seems to me like, yeah, the weather's been pretty nice, or there's been some rain, it hasn't been too bad. But like you said, it is also a global commodity and stuff. So I'm curious if it has, what impact, it's had, if you can quantify that. And two, what can you tell us a little bit more about, like, I know with some crops, right, there's different sensitivities, of course, at different stages of their life cycle, right? Like, I think germinations, right, when it comes out of seed, and then, when it's pollinating, I forget what some of these terms are, certain things it's sensitive to temperatures, and different plants are sensitive to different temperatures. And then there's certain periods when it's critical for rain. Do you have some of that information? And can you, like, at least, like, as of now, I guess it's the early stages of development, like, what is corn, for example, like, most sensitive to? Is it like getting enough rain, certain temperatures, things like that?
Sure. So I'll answer the first part, which was regarding the price and the present price of corn, which we've seen soar to over $7 a bushel. I don't know how much of that has been baked in just based on weather exclusively. So we don't look at it from a standpoint of, we think it could be X amount is as a result of weather. Commodities, agricultural commodities are interesting for a lot of reasons. One is it's not just weather; they are a global crop. It's not just Argentina and Brazil and the United States. There's a crop across China, which is significant. There's a crop in South Africa. There's a European and Western Russia crop. So it's a global commodity. There's also a large currency play. There's a big factor with regards to how the US dollar trades versus other commodities and how that influences price. There's also this idea that potentially there could be an inflation component with regards to these commodities as well. And one other thing is you can store these commodities for over multiple seasons, right? So just like you can store natural gas and be used in a future of time, these commodities are stored. They're not on demand. So there's also the component of the availability of how much you could store, the quality of what you're storing, when you might be using that. And then those are obviously questions. So I guess in what would be multiple bullet points regarding, say, corn on a daily basis, my input on weather is only a couple of those bullet points, and we don't directly address the price issue. So I hope that answered that part of that question.
Yeah, thank you.
The second component is obviously exclusively a weather issue, or almost, which is the life cycle of corn. So corn is roughly a 100 and I don't have a number in front of me. I think it's 140-day crop. I don't have there's a certain number between when you plant it and when you're going to harvest it. And that's pretty fixed. It doesn't matter whether you plant on the 1st of April or the 15th of May. The life cycle maturity, and then when you get to harvest for corn is roughly a fixed number. It may vary depending on like whether you're using hybrid seeds or not, but you know, we don't get into that really very much. Planting is something that you want to plant in somewhat quote unquote ideal conditions, which is you need some moisture in the ground. You don't want to plant in drought, and you don't want to plant with fields that are excessively wet. So meaning fields are saturated, are less than ideal as well. What I've learned though in corn in the last, you know, couple of decades though, is that it doesn't really matter what the price is or what the field conditions is, we're getting crop in the ground. You know, the technology in the United States means we can plant 24/7. We can plant with rapid progress. So even if conditions are not ideal today, if they turn ideal in say 10 days and you get a 5-day window, you'd be shocked at how much crop can get in the ground in a very short window, right? These tractors run day and night. They use GPS. It's all automated. It's just quite amazing. So unless you're in extreme drought or extreme wetness, and by extreme, I mean fields have active sitting water in them, you're going to plant the crop. The second big part is the development stage of corn. So corn's going to grow pretty well until you get to pollination. You know, again, it's going to grow well barring extreme wetness or extreme drought. Pollination occurs, again, a certain number of days after the crop is planted. Typically in the United States, that's in the month of July, or if the crop is planted late, it would be the first half of August. And it basically is when the kernels are kind of set. This ends up becoming a big factor in what we call the yield, right? So we can talk about acres planted, but then we can talk about yield, which really comes down to how big a corn cob is, how much feed are you getting out of that corn cob, the quality of it. And so when a crop pollinates, you really do want ideal temperatures, and that means you don't want heat. And one thing we've seen in the last, say, 10 years or so, we had a couple of years in particular, I think 2011 and 12 were both very acute years that when pollination was occurring, you had extremely hot temperatures in the Midwest, meaning days over 100. But what we know more is that it's the extreme warm overnight temperatures, right? Corn has to, it's kind of perspire through the night, right? It has to cool. And when temperatures stay above a critical threshold of roughly 75 to 80 degrees, depending on the type of corn, the hybrid corn that you're planting, but really warm overnight temperatures will really impact the ability to pollinate and get a great yield out of that corn stalk, corn cob, et cetera, field, no matter what. So we really watch for when pollination is occurring and how acute overnight temperatures are. And when they're extremely warm, we see that really harm the crop. And then the third component is harvest. And similar to planting, harvest can last over a number of weeks. You know, typically you don't want a lot of wind for harvest. You don't want there to be an excess precipitation. In the case of Brazil, we're harvesting in extreme drought. And so, you know, the crop has already been kind of set. You know, it would have been nice to get a little rain here in the last month, but my gut tells me that even a little rain may not have mattered much. In fact, we got really no rain in Brazil for the better part of the last few months. And so the end of pollination and going into harvest for Brazil was really poor. One thing that can change harvest is early freeze or frost. That can knock down the corn stalks and make them much more difficult to harvest. You're going to have corn that's laying flat on the ground, and you're not kind of getting quote unquote all of it into your combines. That happens more when you plant the crop late. So if you get a crop that may not get in the ground until end of May or early June, you're not harvesting until say a month like October or end of October. You run the risk that in the plains and in Midwest, you get into some early cold, and frost and freeze can harm you. So, you know, you're kind of looking for that sweet spot. I don't have an answer for me. I think it's around 140 days for corn maturity. I'll look that up real quick here. Does that answer your question there, Dave?
Yeah, that was great. That was awesome. Thank you.
Yeah, it's you know, it's a component. So it's 120 days for most. I said 140. It's actually 120. Anyway, you know, we spent a lot of time in this contest. I'll be talking about weather week 3, and that's something that I think about every day, and it's very exciting. However, there's other applications of weather. I'm glad we brought up corn this morning. You know, it's a fantastic application to real-time weather and forward-looking. The one challenge is there's a bit of a breakdown. there's not as much of a parallel between weather and price, or attention paid to agricultural commodities as there is towards energy, because energy has such an on-demand component, right? When it's -2 in Dallas, you need the energy. When it's 100 in Washington, D.C., you need it. And so corn isn't, nor any of the ag commodities aren't really quite like that. So it diminishes weather's impact, doesn't eliminate it, but it will tend to diminish it. And there's a lot of other bullet points that will go into how a trader would assess corn or any ag commodity.
Okay, great. So it looks like we're almost out of time. Any last questions for Dave before we close out?
Nothing on my end.
Cool. Thanks, guys. I appreciate it today.
All right, thanks, Dave. Yeah, this was great. Hope we'll see you back again soon.
Super. Thanks.
All right, take care. Bye-bye.